Hello, and welcome to the Come to Your Senses podcast. I'm your host, embodiment-based coach, Mary Lofgren. Here, we explore how to live bravely and beautifully through a lifestyle of embodiment. You'll hear gems to empower you around mindset, mindfulness, somatic psychology, and neuroscience, as well as beauty, food, style, and the art of slow living to meet your soul through the senses. I am so happy that you're here. Let's begin. Hello, everyone, and welcome to Come to Your Senses. Happy week before Valentine's week. At the time of this recording, we are heading into our first full week of February. And one of the things I'm really excited about for this week is I have a pop-up craft date with the members of the Come to Your Senses coterie, where we are going to be crafting handmade Valentines. Valentine's Day, here at Come to Your Senses, sensuality, romance, passion. These are key aspects of our way of life. And so Valentine's Day, which is a holiday intended to honor the erotic as it expresses in all of our relationships, is a very special day. We're decking the halls and making handmade Valentines for my friends, my family, my goddess children, my pets, really anyone in my life that I have affection for is one of my favorite annual traditions. And as you hear me say that, you might think, oh, that sounds like so fun. I should do that. And then immediately you might have a thought like, no, you shouldn't. You don't have enough time for that. You're not creative enough for that. How would you even start? And if that happens, you are in exactly the right place, because in today's episode, we are going to take your sweet and spicy inner critic, and we are going to take them to the spa for a little fluff and buff and scrub and rub. And if you remember, I think it was Comedy Central. Back in the 90s, there was this show called The Critic. And as I was preparing for this episode, it was an animated show. As I was preparing for this episode, I was thinking about that show and how The Critic was this kind of unlikable character that, was kind of deplorable on the show, but you secretly loved him. And that is my intention for our episode today. Is not necessarily to change your inner critic, because your inner critic, like all parts of your shadow, is there to serve you in some way, but instead to help to shift your relationship to it, where there's not so much tension and domination and control, but instead there's a bit more buoyancy and friendliness and, dare I say, romance. So that is what is on the menu du jour. And speaking of romance, something else that is just filling my life with romance and delight is that this is our 99th episode, my friends. And next week, on Valentine's Day, how could one have even planned this? That on Valentine's Day lands our 100th episode of Come to Your Senses. I am so excited and so impressed that the universe planned it that way. And in honor of 100 episodes, we are throwing a party, and you are invited to a world-class self-love celebration, Come to Your Senses style. So on Valentine's Day at 1 p.m. Eastern, I will be hosting a free party called Enamor. And this party is really just my gift to you. This is not a webinar necessarily. It's not something where you're getting a taste of my programs to book into or be sold other programs, although I do those from time to time. This is a chance for the Come to Your Senses community, which is full of rich, diverse, global community from over 123 countries. Hello! So exciting. And a chance for us to all come together and to celebrate this day that honors romance and passion through a body-based meditation that will drench your heart in love. There will be a special love letter writing workshop where the recipient of that love letter might just be you yourself. We'll be doing some soft, sensual movement to envelop your body in sensuality. And there will be a fabulous drawing with gorgeous prizes from Olivine Atelier perfume, Pound jewelry, Wildling beauty, and a grand prize of a 20 by 10 original mixed media painting by Miranda Wildman, valued at $920, plus a sizzling guest performance with my burlesque mentor, one of the teachers who started it all in my life, Joe Boobs Weldon, who is the founder of the New York School of Burlesque. And so this Valentine's, if you desire to be dunked in chocolate like a strawberry and left out to dry and be devoured, join us at schoolofsensualliving.com/party to celebrate you and to celebrate Come to Your Senses. I can't wait for you to be my Valentine. And so let's dive into our gems on your inner critic and laying your inner critic out on a chaise lounge with cucumbers and a face mask and a towel wrapped around its head and the fluffiest slippers on its feet. And as I paint that visual, I'll invite you to, if you're in a place where you can close your eyes and just imagine that for a moment, and imagine your inner critic as you usually see it. Any of its distinguishing features, like the tone of its voice, the outfit it might be wearing, its age. It might look like a human, it might look like something else. And then imagine laying it down to relax, pouring essential oil all over its feet, letting it relax and soften into a nest of silk and feathers, and just noticing how that impacts the inner critic. What I notice in my own body is it starts by yelling and even resisting, like, get this fluffy bathrobe off of me. And then, like a child who's fighting their bedtime, slowly starts to be unable to resist the trance of relaxation and then stops yelling for a minute. And, the inner critic is, as I said at the start of the episode, it's very much there for a reason. Our inner critic is a very, very integral part of our system of defense and our system of perceived safety. So when that voice comes in, whenever you have an expansive idea, there is really only so much expansion that the body and the mind can handle without perceiving threat. And so the inner critic, one of the functions of the inner critic, is to prevent over expansion and entering into situations that may be too much for you to handle all at once. And that's just one of the whys of the inner critic. You know, when I coach with clients, a lot of times that question will come up a lot of like, why am I this way? Why am I so hard on myself? Why do I rush so much? And we could spend a legion of episodes teasing that apart. Cultural factors, childhood factors, school factors, going to a Catholic school with nuns for teachers. I could give you a whole thesis on my inner critic. But when it comes to the language of the body and the way that these tracks of memory and emotion and experience live in our body and connect to this critical part in our mind, looking to the past to help figure out the why can be useful. But it also engages that part of our brain that is the analyzer, which once again can give us answers, but doesn't always lead to full resolution. And so today, we're going to focus a little less on the why and a little more on the what is happening right now, what is happening when your inner critic engages, and the how of how to create, once again, a more hospitable working relationship with your inner critic. I like to think about my inner critic as kind of like a coworker that I have to learn to love. If you've ever worked in an office with someone you find intolerable, which I certainly have, there's not the option sometimes to just cut off that relationship or not interact with that person. There has to be an adaptability. And so that brings us to our first gem, which, if we were making this a spa treatment, would be the Radical Acceptance Aromatherapy Steam Treatment. So what I love about the word acceptance, and I feel like this has been such a significant thread of my own learning over the last couple of years, is that acceptance and approval are two very different things. So approval might mean that you like something, that you welcome it into your life, that, approval, trying to use approval, I think in this kind of a context might look like toxic positivity, where you're trying to gaslight yourself into liking something that you don't like or that is harmful, or any of those other attributes that we sometimes use to cope with our inner world. And acceptance is different from approval in that it requires zero liking, zero loving, zero brain reorganization, except that we stop fighting with reality. So the inner critic, the very natural response to the aggression of the inner critic is a strong defensiveness. And the way this shows up in behavior is, maybe you wake up with the voice of the inner critic very loud. So you instantly are off to the races trying to be productive, to try to outwork the inner critic and get ahead on your to-do list, with the idea that the inner critic will then stop talking and you can relax. If you've tried that thousands of times, as many of us have, you might find that that is not necessarily effective. When you get to the bottom of your to-do list, a whole new to-do list opens up and the inner critic just revs up even more. You might also have more of a flight response to the voice of your inner critic, where the inner critic is acting up, and instead of running towards it to fight it with overproductivity, you run away from it and do nothing. And where you just feel so overwhelmed that your body freezes its energy to be able to survive that overwhelm. And all of a sudden your behavior and your ability to be productive goes down to like -10. Another common expression of that I noticed in myself this morning is that when there's overwhelm, I will start doing, but I'm not actually doing the things that need to be done. So I'm heading out to San Francisco in the spring, and this morning I was doing my numbers for my budget, knowing that I had to record a podcast today and, do a couple of other important things on my list that I feel some pressure around. And all of a sudden, this was a great time to look at price comparisons for flights and, send messages to Airbnbs and all of those things, when the truth is I don't really need to put those dates in stone for another 2 weeks, but it's this funny dissociative productivity that's actually based in avoidance. And so these are all just really common responses to either being dominated by the inner critic or dominated by your resistance to the inner critic. And in a world of binaries, good, bad, guilty, innocent, right, wrong, there's just not a lot of room for our humanness. Our humanness lives in the nuance, and the nuance lives in the field of radical acceptance. That's my experience anyway. And so what that might look like, the radical acceptance steam treatment here, is that when you notice that voice, and, I talk about this a lot on the podcast, that when we're working with the inner voice, it's not so much about what the inner voice is saying, but it's instead how it's being said. So what is its tone, its pitch, and its speed? In other words, time to book San Francisco is one way of saying it. Time to book San Francisco is another way of hearing it. Urgency, whenever I hear urgency in my inner voice, that to me is a cue that my inner critic, or the part of me that is trying to earn my worth in the world by my external sources, is really at the wheel. And when that calmer, more quiet, more one step at a time voice is on board, that's when I know I'm a bit closer to my authentic self and the voice that I might call my own. And yet, I wouldn't say the voice that I would call my own is the predominant, prevailing voice. That inner critic voice is really strong in me. And so when it comes up, what radical acceptance looks like for me is turning towards it like we did in that visualization at the start of the episode. And when I turn towards my inner critic, what I see, it's funny, it kind of shapeshifts. Sometimes I see like a scribbled, like if you were to take a pen and just scribble a big ball of lines in opposing directions, that kind of a shape talking is sometimes what I see with my inner critic. Sometimes I see like a deep, dark hole that feels bottomless in my inner critic. But just in this moment, as I look towards my inner critic, she was wearing a suit from the 80s with tennis shoes, and she had her hands on her hips. And she looked like a character in the movie Working Girl with Melanie Griffith. And, she has got things to do. And she is going to be right over your shoulder, making sure that you do them. And radical acceptance, for me, just simply means being able to see her and say, I see you, I hear you, little disorganized, scribbly ball. And by seeing it, that means I am not it. So that might be a part of me, might be a part of my mind, my system, all of these factors that we talked about at the start of the episode, my defense mechanism. But that is different than who I am. That is what my mind is doing right now, but that's different than the heart of who I am. It's just one aspect of me. And radical acceptance for me in this case, and as always, I encourage you to hold this up to the light of your own experience and see how this lands for you. Radical acceptance feels like I see you and I'm not ashamed of you. I know that you are a normal part of the human experience, and it looks really hard and really tiring to be holding all the pain that you're holding. And then sometimes I'll say, you can be here with me. You know, I'll give that little 1980s tennis shoe wearing corporate Wall Street banker within a computer or a calculator or something that will help her expel her energy while I'm in a different corner of the room doing something else, taking it one step at a time. And she can do her thing, or, you know, sometimes in my mind, I'll offer her something more neutralizing, like some chamomile tea and those fluffy slippers, you know, whatever feels like it would help soothe that anxiousness. And then sometimes, especially when the inner critic is feeling more on the side of like something dark and demented and more violent, like inner violence, sometimes I'll set a strong boundary and I'll say, you know, I see that you're here and this is not who I am, and I'm setting a boundary today. And what that looks like for me is taking actions to take care of myself and not entertaining or giving energy to that inner critic. It's not that I'm fighting it or trying to bat it back, but instead I'm simply not giving it energy and diverting my attention with other things. And so radical acceptance, steam treatment, the end. Spent more time on this gem than I had planned to, but I hope that that little peek into my relationship to my inner critic helps you to connect and orient to relating to yours. The next gem has to do with the animal nature of our inner critic. So as I said before, you know, as human beings, we have this wonderful superpower of being able to imagine the future. This is how we differ from other animals who are completely connected to instinct and to the present moment and don't daydream about future scenarios. But instead, we can daydream about beautiful future visions and fantasies and desires, as well as catastrophic outcomes that terrify us. And I remember once being in group therapy, and we were going around the circle saying what we wanted to get from the session. And this particular group was a group around love relationships. And I was in the middle of a breakup, and I just felt pulverized by obsessive thoughts about my ex and my future and, you know, shame and all the stuff that rises to the surface in the fallout of a breakup. And I remember saying to the therapist, what I want to get out of this session is to not be thinking about love all the time, every day. And she said, you know, Mary, there's nothing wrong with you that you think about that all the time. It doesn't make you flawed. It makes you a mammal. And that was so incredibly helpful to hear, because our species has survived for 50 million years in part through obsession with getting our needs met to ensure our survival. And love is perhaps our most foundational need. even more so than shelter, food, water, because especially as little young ones, little young members of the herd, if we don't have love, that means that we don't have the ability to be taken care of, and we will be left to the predators. And my cognitive mind and your cognitive mind, of course, says, well, this isn't 50 million years ago. We have homes now, and we have purified water in this country in some cities. And we have, all of these layers of protection and privilege and ways in which we are not anymore in those prehistoric times. But our cognitive mind has evolved thousands of years faster than our nervous system safety consciousness. And so when you are in that trance of the inner critic, what I would encourage you to look at is, what is it that my inner critic is obsessing about? If it's productivity or an outcome with your children who are having a difficult time, or whatever it is, a love interest who is fallen off the face of the earth, know that inner critic pursuit of the answer and the resolution of that, again, doesn't mean that there's anything wrong with you, or that you're pathetic, or that you're unhealed. It simply means that you're a mammal who is programmed for survival. And our sense of belonging is parallel to our sense of safety in the world. So if there's something wrong with your offspring and their survival is threatened, your survival is threatened. If there's something wrong with your mate who you have attached to and bonded to, and who has flooded your system with a sense of safety and relaxation, and now all of a sudden that's taken away, of course your system is going to freak out. And something that I did after that therapy session that was so sweet was I ordered a stuffed animal on Amazon, a little kangaroo, and I would bring it around with me to remind myself, I'm not messed up. I'm not pathetic, that I can't stop thinking about this or obsessing about this or not engaging in this behavior. I'm just a mammal. And I would put that little kangaroo in my lap and I would stroke it and comfort it and use it to comfort me. And that kangaroo now lives in the home of one of the children in my life. As I grew and evolved out of that pain, I no longer needed that kangaroo as a constant reminder. And so when you find yourself in that inner critic obsession, perhaps telling yourself this isn't personal, it's animal. And then taking care of, as Mary Oliver would say, that soft animal of your body and let it love what it loves. And our final gem is going to see your inner Marta. So I am a licensed esthetician and have been since I was 18 years old, and worked in spas and salons for about 10 years. And at one spa where I worked, there was an esthetician named Marta, and she was such a loving, feminine, just clients would go to her and leave transformed, not just by her products and her touch, but just by her loving, sweet nature. And one of the ways that we can help relate differently to the inner critic is to help bring some balance into our inner voice by also cultivating a loving inner voice. And one of the ways to do that is with two-way prayer. So two-way prayer is an exercise where you write a question in the form of a letter. So whatever word works for you around describing a power greater than yourself, such as God, universe, higher power, whatever. I write Dear HP, higher power, holy presence, heavenly pussy, whatever you want to use. And then a question. What would you have me know? What would you have me let go of? What would you have me open to receive? How do I get the hell out of here? I have a whole journal of kind of hate mail that I write to God sometimes, like, Dear God, why are you so annoying? Dear God, why do you expect so much from me? And it's a really beautiful dialogue that I have with the God of my understanding by getting out some of the rage and frustration I have towards the God of my conditioning. But that's another episode. So writing your question, whatever it is, just one question, and then writing to yourself using a term of endearment. So, beloved, your name. Sweet, your name. You might use a pet name like my sweet dear sugar plum or little ladybug or whatever conjures that sense of cozy, warm love. And then it's just a stream of consciousness where you invite the divine, a consciousness greater than your inner critic and your worried mind, to inhabit your pen. And the response might sound super dreamy and prayerful and poetic, or it might sound super simple, like, how do you get the hell out of here? Just get in the car. I'm always shocked and delighted at the simplicity and the abundance of this consciousness that I would call my loving inner voice within me when I make space for it. And so, my loves, that brings our gems for today to a close. As always, it is such a privilege to dance between your eardrums on these topics. And so if you enjoyed this episode, please like, rate, review, and subscribe. Like and rate, I think, are the same thing, but that is the holy trifecta of podcast growth and distribution. And so it means so much to me to read your reviews and to help our podcast reach more listeners through your reviews and your ratings. And happy 99th episode. I feel like this is Christmas Eve and next week's episode will be Christmas Day. And I hope to celebrate with you under the chocolate heart tree at Enamor. Once again, you can RSVP at schoolofsensualliving.com/party to be dazzled, delighted, and delovelied this Valentine's. Have a wonderful week. We'll see you next time. For coaching, classes, and community in creating a lifestyle of embodiment, head to schoolofsensualliving.com. There you'll find a free video series on how to reduce anxiety and intercept the stress response through powerful, confident body language. Head to schoolofsensualliving.com/confidence to watch your first video today.